Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, we need you too, says the French president to Africa's business elite as Kenya hosts a summit aimed at levelling up the region. Paris is a co-host, but though billions in French investment are lined up, awkwardness remains. And there is a ways to go before the country and the continent are in step. Well, on that note, it is not just all about the meetings. We take a closer look at the cost of some of the deeply rooted misperceptions and clichés about Africa still clinging on in societies that wish to partner with it. I'm joined by the Executive Director of Advocacy Group Africa No Filter, Moki Makura, to talk of the slow work it will take to roll that back. And the reappearance of the ghost of the forest. Kenyan conservationists working hard to boost the number of critically endangered bongo antelopes. These numbers have fallen below 100. But first, to Kenya, where dozens of heads of states headed to on Monday for the reopening of a summit meant to platform the best of Africa and help channel resources to opportunity there. Now, the Africa Forward gathering is co-hosted with France, and more than 23 billion euros of investment has already been pledged because of it. France is pivoting towards Anglophone Africa as its ties with Francophone former colonies have grown ever more strained. But Kenyan President William Ruto says that he'll take partnerships wherever they're found if it takes Africa to where it needs to go.
We have many BPO companies set up in Kenya. Why? Because we have young people with the right skills, we have the right infrastructure in terms of internet connectivity, and we have a very enterprising and entrepreneurial population. So in my opinion, this is the space in which we are operating, and I think every other country should be able to think in that direction, because the future is about technology, the future is digital, and AI is going to be at the center of it.
A lot of solutions are made in the US or made in China. And when you speak about artificial intelligence, okay, a lot of us today are consumers. So I think we have a common fight, a common battle together of investment, which is to build our strategic autonomy for Europe and Africa. And if we build it together, we will be much stronger.
French President Emmanuel Macron there. Now, our correspondent Tom Canetti is at the summit in the Kenyan capital, and he tells us more.
So Monday was all about business and the private sector. There were more than 2,000 economic stakeholders here in attendance, and it was up to French business leaders to eye potential opportunities in sectors which France specialises in.
We have several sectors. First of all is, of course, the tech sector, especially here in Nairobi, which is, to be clear, a hub, a very important hub for the sub-region of this eastern part of Africa. Of course, we have the medical tech, everything around medicines producing and paramedicines producers, and also everything that is a turnaround the agricultural sector. Agriculture is an important part of the GDP, 20% of the GDP here in Kenya, and we can have French offerings.
So the topic of France's ruptured relations with countries in the Sahel, former French colonies and Francophone countries there, has been a heated topic that has been debated at the summit. But for some Kenyan business leaders, the past is not going to affect a future potential opportunity.
I don't want to say I know what France has done in West Africa. I'm not private to that. But I think that we all have a light to change and to transform ourselves. If France have done long things and then it chooses to collect them or make them light, this is a great opportunity. And that is how progress is made. We don't live in the past.
So Tuesday is going to be all about politics. There's going to be more than 30 heads of state in attendance. And one of the themes here is that, or one of the ways rather in which people are regarding this summit is kind of like a stepping stone towards the G7, which France will host in June. French President Emmanuel Macron has invited William Ruto, his Kenyan counterpart, to attend the G7 summit. And that comes after he reportedly had invited Cyril Ramaphosa, the South African president originally, but according to the South African government, Macron has uninvited Ramaphosa after pressure from Donald Trump. And one of the themes around this leading up to the G7 that is going to be discussed here at the summit on Tuesday is France's advocacy for Africa to have more of an influential role on the global stage. And part of that is France supporting Africa to have 2 permanent seats on the UN Security Council. So we can expect the French president, along with his African counterparts, to discuss that on Tuesday, as well as in France in June. And at the end of this summit, we can expect the signing of the Nairobi Declaration.
Well, as you heard there from Tom, it all sounds very chummy and very promising. But for a closer look at the ramifications of the conference, I'm joined now by the Executive Director of Advocacy Group Africa No Filter, Moki Makura. Moki, thanks so much for making this whistle-stop tour to help break down the significance of this Africa Forward Summit. So what do you make of it? It's been billed as a reset. Reset of what? For whom? Between whom?
Look, there's a number of countries that are courting the continent, courting Africa, and I think this is just another one. France needs to get behind everybody else. So I don't think it's a reset of anything, because it's really about optics. A lot of these conferences, these sort of, even the language they're using, partnerships, cooperation, it's optics. We've got to see this kind of change into something real and tangible. And for the last couple of years, nothing really has changed that much, right? And you can see with, France holding this event in East Africa, not West Africa. Let's see.
So one of the things that Macron said about his hopes for the summit was that the relationship between the continent and France now has no hang-ups. That seems like a broad statement for a relationship that has 2 sides to it.
Well, I'm not sure what he means, like, has no hang-ups. I mean, we know that there is a cost to the stereotypes about Africa that the West holds, France being one of them. There's a perception that the continent is broken, they're there to help the continent, that, and it's aid that we need, that we lack the agency to create the change, we're dependent. All of that has a cost. Africa No Filter has done a report to try and figure out what are the costs of these, stereotypes. And we came up with a figure based on the risk premium that African countries pay, because African countries pay for this cost, right? And it came up to something like $4.2 billion a year. That's what the cost of media stereotypes, that's what it costs the continent. And that's because we pay more for the perceived cost of risk, right? Because I'm not saying there's no corruption, there's no issues, but there's corruption everywhere. There's issues everywhere. But Africa pays for it because investment into Africa slows down, because people think there's more risk, right? So when France talks about the continent, and they hold conferences like that, they spend a lot of money, a lot of investment into conferences like this. It's to what end? Because are they actually changing any practices? Are they changing anything in reality? Because if things don't change, then we're going to have more of the same, right?
So is there not, we're looking at a conference where already, even before it opened on Monday, there were billions being pledged and announced as having been generated for the continent and the relationship between France and Africa. So does that not go some way towards mitigating some of the concerns about how negative stereotypes about the risks of doing business in Africa means that there are fewer opportunities taken up there? Because don't big conferences like this, where you have all the money men in the room, address those narratives in some way? Or
yeah, look, I think we're at an inflection point in Africa right now. We have the critical minerals, the rare minerals that the world needs. The world has to come to us, but it's a competition. China recently announced that it's removing all trade tariffs to Africa. What's the next thing? Somebody's got to do something. Like France is now announcing, its companies are coming in announcing trade deals with Africa. everybody's courting us, right? We are in an incredibly powerful position right now as a continent, and we have to act together, and we have to act fast, right?
But act in what way?
Act in that we need to kind of remember who we are. Remember that we don't have to give up, because behind France, there's another country. There's Turkey, there's China, there's so much going on the continent right now. And I feel that what France has done, which has been really good, is they've made this very public. They've made a conference out of it. There's a lot of bilateral, meetings that are going on, things behind the scenes that we probably don't even know about. What I think France has done is that they've put it in the public sphere. They've made it very public. So these commitments will happen, should happen, but they're bilateral agreements, right? So I think that the African companies that are there negotiating have to make sure these things happen, because we're very good at announcing things, right? But we never see the follow-up. We never see the actual outcome or the impact of these deals.
I don't have you for much longer, but what I think, you mentioned that some of the research that you've done has been very much at the social level. It's been man on the street. And so that's the level at which these really damaging perceptions are held.
Yeah.
How does that and the impact of that become affected by these very high-level business, economic, political figures getting together and spending money between themselves?
Yeah. Well, I think it is that thing when, wealthy people talk to wealthy people. Because the study that we did, we looked at, we did a study with the University of Bath. There was a professor there who looks specifically at stereotypes. He asked 1,000 participants in the US and the UK their feelings about Africa, what they thought about Africa, the words that came up. And it was exactly what we know, that people always imagine Africa as this poor, hard place. They didn't want to do business with Africa. They didn't want to buy anything from Africa because they didn't see it as a continent that was modern. So at the end of the day, whatever happens in these rooms, it doesn't necessarily translate into the man on the street. It doesn't change their perception of the continent. And that, for me, is the issue.
Thank you so much for breaking down a very complex, nuanced relationship about perceptions of the African continent, even as it's being increasingly courted by bigwigs from around the world. Moki Makura, Executive Director of Africa No Filter, thank you so much. Well, we head now to Kenya's wildlife, where the rare bongo antelope is slowly being reintroduced into its native habitat. Dubbed the ghost of the forest for its ability to camouflage itself, very few remain.
To spot Kenya's ghost of the forest, one needs to visit Mount Kenya's Wildlife Conservancy. For 18 years, vets and conservationists have worked tirelessly to protect and preserve the bongo, a critically endangered species of antelope, which once roamed in their thousands in the Mount Kenya, Aberdare, Eburu and Mau forests before being decimated by diseases in the 60s.
They told me that the bongo was an animal that used to be found here in Kenya, especially Mount Kenya, and I live close by, but I never encountered the animal.
The last wild bongo was spotted in 1994 in the Mount Kenya forest area before the Conservancy reintroduced its first 10 in 2022. With less than 100 members of the species left in the wild, the Conservancy has set itself a goal of reintroducing 750 bongos by 2050. To do so, the breeders and conservationists have imported antelopes from foreign countries in order to prevent inbreeding among the species.
In this context, it's very important that we are raising bongos, which are not only strong in body, but also they are stronger in the way they are going to pass out their genes to the next generation. That is very, very critical, because we want to have a population that is self-sustaining.
To increase the diversity and strength of the gene pool, 4 males were imported from the Czech Republic last week. After a quarantine period, they will breed with the females on site. The animals born from this will have minimal contact with humans in order to preserve their survival instincts and their species in the long run.
And finally, we'll leave you with images of the great and good from across Africa, swanning around in their star-studded glitz, as only Africans can, celebrating at the Africa Magic Viewers' Choice Awards over the weekend in Lagos. It was the 12th time the ceremony shone a light on the continent's top talents. This year, zoomed in on honouring the craft and culture in an increasingly innovative space. Big names like Uzo Urukwe and Linda Ejiofor taking home awards honouring their performance. That's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks so much for joining us. Do so again. Take care.